this time, his son, Dr. Nicholson, is going to come and share some words with us.
First of all, if I'd known you were going to read all those names, I would have maybe not given them to you. I'm going to break the advice I always give families. Reverend Jacobs was kind enough not to give me the advice because he knew that I knew it, because like physicians are the worst patients, preachers are the worst members, or the worst congregants. And so I always worry that when families stand up to speak, that they won't make it through. And I always encourage them to type it out. So if I can't make it through, here you go. I'm going to try to keep my remarks somewhat brief, but if you have followed my reputation, that is, well, not my reputation. First of all, thank you for being here this morning. My dad was my hero. Now, some people thought my dad was a hard man, and he could be tough. There is no doubt about that. He was strict. As a child, he rarely, and I just put that in there as a nice disclaimer because I honestly don't remember a single time in my life when he asked me to do something a second time. If he had to ask me a second time, it was followed by some form of corporal punishment. I was expected, and I say this to my own son, God help us all, I was expected to respond cheerfully and quickly. And there are some who might worry that I will raise my son in the same way I was raised. My mother and my wife are the two most important people who worry about that. But I never doubted my parents' love. Other than my father, other than my mother, there was no one on this planet that my father loved more than me. He was my best teacher, and I account much of what I do well today to having him as a mentor in my early days. I never doubted that I was his favorite person to hang out with. There wasn't a single weekend that would go by when he wasn't asking me on a Saturday morning, you want to go with me today, son? He never would tell me where we were going, and when I got to that teenager stage, you know, that hard-headed, good-for-nothing stage, and I'd say to my father, well, where are you going? He'd say, it doesn't matter where I'm going. Do you want to go with me? When I was younger and less apt to try to spar with him, I'd go with him, and he would take me all over the eastern shore of Maryland. Sometimes we just ride in back roads of where Public Landing was, and through the woods near Girdle Tree and Stockton. And I'll have to admit those rides eventually paid off one night when I was 16. The state trooper turned around and took off after me coming home from Pocomoke City, and I told him, look, my dad's taught me every back road in this area. I ultimately wound up hiding behind the Methodist church in Girdle Tree. I got home safely that day. I never told my father what happened. He knows now, doesn't he? I remember my dad taking me over to Hargis' Exxon. I don't know what it's called now. From time immemorial, it'll be Hargis Exxon to me. There was a barber shop right behind it, and every Saturday we'd go there and we'd sit, whether we needed a haircut or not. And as Dad got older, he needed less and less of those. All the men would gather around and they'd solve all the problems of the world. And occasionally my dad would chime in, but frankly, most of the time I remember him just listening. After some time of active listening, he'd then share his opinion. We'd leave and I'd say, Dad, how come you listened to that fella so long that you didn't agree with? I know that you didn't agree with him. How come you didn't chime in earlier and tell him what you thought? He said, son, you can't expect to change a man's mind unless you at least listen to his opinion for a while. Well, that bit of salty wisdom is what has carried me in my own ministry and in my own life. No matter how much we disagree with somebody, for goodness sake, just take a few moments and listen to them. It'll mean the world. Dad was a proverbial list of, well, proverbs. Some of them were not all that helpful. I remember one night, I don't know who it was. If you are the person, if the person is here who it was, please don't tell me because I don't remember. But they had worn out their welcome over at 202 Purnell Street, Snow Hill, Maryland, and Dad turned to Mom and said, "Come on, Mary, let's go to bed so these people can go home." Others of his words of wisdom were a bit more poignant. "Son, always work hard for your boss. If you work so that he can drive a Cadillac, you'll be able to drive a Chevrolet. But never go to work with a man who only wants to drive a Rolls Royce, because if you do, you'll wind up walking everywhere." It was a bit of wisdom that taught me the importance not only of honest, hard work, but it was a bit of wisdom that taught me to be mindful of the character of others, especially those with whom you might wind up working for someday, or being in a relationship with. Things like honesty and hard work were a huge part of my dad's constitution. But I think that above all, dignity and pride in yourself were even more important. Now, my dad tried to make sure that we had everything we needed when I was growing up, and as a teenager, he gave me, Eric, you'll remember this old car, won't you? 1972 brown, and we won't say what kind of brown, Dodge Dart with a 1969 Plymouth Valiant 190 cubic inch 1-barrel carburetor engine in it. You could wind up a rubber band and it would be faster than that car was. When I took that to school, let's just say it did not make the Snow Hill High School student paper car of the month. When I went home and told Dad that all the fellas, I don't think Eric ever made fun of me, but when the other fellas made fun of me, I said, "Dad, they're making fun of me." He said, "Son, it gets you to point A to point B faster than walking." Well, I decided that what might help that car was a good sound system. If I couldn't go fast, at least I could sound good going slow. Well, we didn't have any money for that, and when I told Dad that I wanted a Pioneer sound system, that's still a popular sound system, Dad said, "We can't afford that, son." So I saved all the money that I could working at the various jobs that I had, and I went down to the Western Auto downtown and I bought me a brand new AudioVox stereo system. Now, some of you are laughing because you know that an AudioVox stereo system is absolutely the worst stereo system on the planet. Well, the next day I went to school, and not only were they laughing at my 1972 Dodge Dart, but boy, were they giving me some ribbing about that AudioVox stereo system that if you went past midway, started to crackle and pop. I went home and told Dad about the ribbing I'd received. He was working up at the Hope Creek Power Plant in New Jersey at the time. Now, if you know anything about large construction sites, you know you can get anything you want on the planet from those fellas. He'd come home on the weekends, and one weekend he came home, walked in the house, and threw me a bag. I opened up that bag, and inside that bag were 2 brand new Pioneer stereo system speaker covers. Just the covers. We took them, now Eric knows the truth. We took them covers out of that 1972 Dodge Dart and we put them over top them AudioVox speakers. And they look good. But now some people might say, well, you know what, it would have been better, boy, if you had just learned the humility of having a cheesy sound system. But my dad understood that a teenager has got to have some dignity. And it wasn't the Pioneer system I wanted. But for a while, I had the dignity that I so wanted. For Pete's sake, I was driving a Dodge Dart and cut my dad some slack. Dad had been working hard to make sure that I could get the best education possible. He went where the money was so that he could send me to Worcester Country School. And I will tell you that I was the only student at that private school whose father was a construction worker and not a physician or a lawyer. He wanted me to have the best opportunity to make the most of my life. He was proud that I was there. But then I decided I wanted to play football. Dad, I want to go to Snow Hill High School to play football. Absolutely not. Dad, you don't understand that if I go to play football, a big fellow like me can get a football scholarship to a college. Dad said, no, son. You go to college playing football, you'll get hurt and then you'll lose everything. If you go to college on your brains instead of your brawn, you might be able to make it through okay. I don't know what ultimately caused him to relent, because he rarely relented. But finally I was allowed to go to Snow Hill High School. I joined the football team and I worked hard. I wanted to start. I was assigned to nose guard, defensive line. I was one of the few players that only played one way. Dad never came to any of the practices. When the first game came around, I knew he was opposed to it. He was afraid that I would break my neck, which incidentally I actually did the following year. Nevertheless, I had refrained from asking him if he was going to come to the football game. I didn't want to know the answer. But when game day arrived, I remember suiting up and I remember scanning the stands there at the stadium in Snow Hill, and he wasn't there. The game started, and Coach Vanderveen grabbed me by the face mask on my helmet and started yelling at me about what I needed to do to shut down the offense. I really didn't hear what Coach Vanderveen said, because over his shoulder I saw my dad. He was standing there by the fence, not in the stands. You had to pay $2 to get in the stands. You could stand by the fence for free. He looked over at me. We caught each other's eye, and I'm not sure if he saw my surprise or my shock or my immense gratitude that he had come to watch. But he looked at me, and he nodded. It didn't matter what Coach Vanderveen said to me. It didn't matter about all of the training, all of the amping up that we had done, the cheers of the crowd, the yelling of my teammates, because all I knew is my dad had nodded at me. And that was my permission to go past that offensive line and introduce myself to that quarterback personally, which I did. You see, that year I was named Defensive Lineman of the Year. Some people say it was the training. I remember the coach saying that. He worked hard in the gym. Some people said it was because I paid attention when it came time to watch the tapes, and I knew my plays, and I knew the plays of the other team. But I'm here to tell you today, you know what made me get that? My dad, when he nodded. That's all I need. My dad was my hero. He had a way of unleashing potential in people and in me. He was hard. He freely offered his critiques to me, and frankly, he offered them to some of you too, didn't he? But at the end of the day, he told me that I could do whatever I set my mind to, and I never considered failure was an option or even a possibility, because my dad said that if I put my mind to it, I could do it. I toyed with the idea of, if college didn't work out, I could follow my dad's footsteps as a union electrician. So that summer after my senior year, Dad got me a job with the company he was working with, Rommel Electric, there in Salisbury. It was the worst summer of my life. I was assigned to work with a lineman gang, digging holes to put in boxes for a series of new traffic lights along Route 13 in Salisbury. If you go through Salisbury on Route 13, think of me. It wasn't until years later that I would learn that Dad had told the foreman of that job to give me the hardest, dirtiest tasks he had, because he wanted to make sure that I would commit myself to being a good student in college. It worked. My dad was my hero. We talked every Saturday throughout college and seminary. Not a Saturday went by that we didn't talk. A lifelong Methodist, not a United Methodist, a Methodist. He could quote his catechism book, even in the last days of his life. He was disappointed when I was ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Son, he said, the Methodists are a much better union. And that's true. My Methodist colleagues have guaranteed jobs, housing, and minimum salaries. What are we doing? Those things aren't even heard of in the Christian church movement. But like my decision to play football, Dad supported me again. I remember him vesting me in my robe at the front of this church. He could barely get it up over my shoulders. I was a bit taller than he was. He was so proud. His first words to me weren't, "Good job, son." It was, "Are you ready?" Poignant. "This doesn't mean I'm converting, son." When Dad died, the congregation I served took it pretty hard. After a few weeks of experiencing the outpouring of love and support from my congregation, one of my congregants told me that I had shared so much about my mom and dad that they felt like they knew them as well as if they'd been with them all their life. The lessons Dad taught me throughout life make a regular appearance in all my sermons, because Dad was my hero. He was so proud of his grandchildren, you know, the ones that aren't paying attention right now. When we lost our first daughter, my wife and I remember Dad and Mom came to visit shortly thereafter. My wife Shauna had given me a gift of a photo of our daughter's footprints that I display in my office. Dad picked up that photo. And in that moment, I remember all the memories that came back on the day that Shauna and I lost our daughter Grace. I remember I called my parents. And I walked to a nearby stairwell to talk to them on the phone. And as I sobbed on that phone, my mom prayed. And my dad told me that I would be okay. He told me that she was okay. And that I needed to tough it up and be strong for my wife. The great thing about Dad is he always told you what you needed to hear, not what you wanted to hear. And some of you might think that he was being hard, but you know what? He was right. I continued to weep, and he told me to stay on the phone as long as I needed to and cry it all out. After my weeping began to subside, he asked me if I was okay. I told him I was. He said, "All right, now get back in that room with your wife. She needs you. Frankly, you need her too." It was what I needed to hear. You may not agree with it, but you're wrong. Anyway, my dad was holding that picture of those footprints. He picked up the photo. He said, "Is this Grace?" I said, "Yeah." He looked at me, and I looked at him. We didn't say anything for a few moments. "Dad, Shauna and I believe she's with her grandparents." Now, my father's dad, he called him Daddy. Dad said, "Yes, Daddy is holding her right now." You see, Grandfather Nicholson was my dad's hero. I guess I knew Dad was going to die in these past few months. He never let an opportunity to slip by to tell me how proud he was of me. How proud he was of Shauna, of his grandson Isaac Levi, and his granddaughter Annalise. Before he died, he saw me complete my doctoral studies. He watched his grandson grow into a toddler, and he told me that now that I had a daughter, there'd always be at least one woman who would always think I could do no wrong. With all due respect to my wife, who knows my flaws and loves me anyway. Dad died the way he lived, on his own terms, and with dignity. He died at home in the arms of my mother, each telling the other how much they loved one another. We talked by telephone the day before he died, and his last words were, "I love you, son." "I know, Dad. I know. I love you too." I told him on one occasion recently, "Dad, my favorite phrase about you, you're my hero." He didn't say anything back. That was his way. He just told me that he was proud of me, just like when a parent says to a child that they are disappointed in them. You remember how that is. When a parent tells a child they're proud of them, that means more than anything. Sorry, Reverend Jacobs. If you want to go get lunch, go ahead and get lunch. I asked Reverend Jacobs, I said, after I'm done, I want you to preach the gospel, brother. That's why we're here, to preach the gospel. So let me close. I wish I could tell you more. I have tons of stories, tons of examples of how my dad was a man of integrity, honesty, a man of dignity, pride in what he did and how he lived. After all, he was my hero. Obviously, I think that. It always bothered me when people would tell me that Dad was too hard on me. He was tough. But he was tough because he loved me. And he was trying the best that he knew how to make sure I'd be a good man. I told my wife yesterday, I said, you know, I'm the person I am today because of my mother. She taught me the faith. She loved me unconditionally. She gave everything she had for me and even risked her own life to bring me into the world. I'm the person I am today because of my mother. But I'm the man that I am today because of my father.